Hello students, welcome back. As you know that the body of the sponges is entirely made up of cells, but sponges are not the only animals whose body is made up of cells. There is another phylum, that is Phylum Coelenterata, who also have cellular body of organization. So in this part we'll be discussing about the general characters of the Phylum Coelenterata. So let's start. So students, now we'll start with the second phylum of kingdom Animalia, that is the Phylum Coelenterata. So Phylum Coelenterata can also be known as Phylum Cnidaria. The Cnidarians get their name by the presence of specialized cells known as the cnidocytes. So these cnidocytes carry stinging organelles, which are also known as the nematocytes. The cnidoblasts or nematocytes are mainly present on the tentacles of these organisms. It contains a poisonous substance which is called as the hypotoxin. Here in this diagram, in this figure, you can see that the tentacles are present around the top mouth of these organisms. These are the tentacles, and this inset shows the presence of the cnidoblast on the tentacles. Now these cnidoblasts, an enlarged view of this cnidoblast, this figure which shows the cnidoblast cells, an enlarged view of cnidoblast cells. So in this cnidoblast there is a nematocyst in which a coiled thread-like structure is present. So whenever these organisms senses prey in their surrounding, they discharge this thread from the nematocyst and attack their prey or catch their prey. The coelentrates occur in two forms, that is the polyp and the medusa. The polyp form is mostly sessile, means it is non-motile, but it can sometimes it shows motility. It is cylindrical in shape and it may be solitary or often lives in large colonies. The next form is the medusa. Medusa is umbrella in shape, it is free swimming and it is always solitary. So in these organisms, these two forms alternate throughout the life cycle of these animals, and this process is known as the alternation of generation or metagenesis. The group of different types of zooids that are present in the polyps and medusa form both. They show polymorphism. The body wall of these animals is two-layered. The outer wall is known as the epidermis and the inner wall is known as the gastrodermis. So between the epidermis and the gastrodermis there is a layer known as the mesoglia, which is a gelatinous matrix. It acts as a interconnecting layer between the gastrodermis and the epidermis. So this figure shows the alternation of generation, or which is also known as the metagenesis. Here you can see that in this cycle both sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction are alternating. This figure shows a colony of polyp form in which a reproductive polyp gets detached from the parent body and forms a medusa. In the medusa stage, sexual reproduction occurs, and by the process of meiosis, egg and sperm are formed. The fusion of the egg and sperm, that is known as the fertilization, goes on to form the zygote, which after development forms a planular larva. So the larval stage of coelentrates is known as the planular larva. Now the planular larva, it develops into a polyp and it gets matured, and then it forms it performs the function of asexual reproduction, that is by budding. Again it alternates into a medusa form. So this cycle goes on throughout the life cycle of these organisms. About the outer and the inner wall of these organisms, The outer wall is the epidermis and the inner wall is the gastrodermis. In the epidermis, cnidoblasts are present. Beside cnidoblast, epitheliomuscular cells are present, nerve cells are present, sensory cells are there, and interstitial cells are also present. In the gastrodermis, it comprises of mainly of epitheliomusculonutritive cells, gland cells, interstitial cells, and nerve cells and sensory cells are also present in this layer beside epidermis. The cavity of coelentrates, the body cavity of the coelentrates, is known as coelentron. So Coelenterata is named after the presence of this body cavity in these animals. These coelentrates have incomplete digestive tract, means there is only a single opening. These show the blind sac body plan. These animals have blind sac body plan, means there is only a single opening which serves both the purpose of ingestion and egestion. Here in this figure, you can see the epidermis layer and the gastrodermis, which is separated by gelatinous matrix known as the mesoglia. In the epidermis, you can see the presence of cnidoblast cells, sensory cells, there are interstitial cells and epitheliomuscular cells, and in the gastrodermis, gland cells and nutritive muscular cells are shown. The digestion in these organisms is intercellular and intracellular both. That means that the digestion takes place in the coelentron as well as in the food vacuole. The respiration and excretion takes place to the general body surface by the process of diffusion. The nervous system is present both in the polyp and the medusa form, and the nervous system is diffuse type. That means there is a loose network of nerve fiber of the nerve cells on either side of the mesoglia. We have already discussed that nerve cells are present both in the epidermis, that is the outer wall, and the gastrodermis, that is the inner wall. So, the nerve fiber of the nerve cells are present both in the epidermis and the gastrodermis. The neurons in these animals are non-polar. Non-polar neurons are those type of neurons in which the dendrons and axons are not functionally differentiated. And we also know that sensory cells are also present in these organisms. The sexes in these animals may be separate or united, and coelentrates can reproduce asexually by budding, that occurs in the polyp form, and sexually by formation of the male and the female gamete, that is the sperm and the ova, which occurs in the medusa form. Gonads in these organisms do not have ducts. The fertilization may be external or internal. External means that the fertilization is occurring outside the body of an organism, and in internal fertilization, the fusion of the male and the female gamete is occurring inside the body of an animal. The cleavage in these organisms is holoblastic. In holoblastic cleavage, what happens is, suppose there is an egg. An egg has both an animal pole and a vegetal pole. So, in holoblastic cleavage, what happens is that first cleavage always occurs along the animal pole and the vegetal pole axis, and the second cleavage is always perpendicular to the first cleavage. So, this is known as the holoblastic cleavage. Development in these organisms includes a larval stage, and the larva of these organisms is known as the planula larva. So this figure shows the medusa and the polyp stage. The Aurelia is a free swimming form, and Adamsia is a sessile form. About the examples of the coelentrates, I have arranged for you a free swimming form that is known as the Aurelia. The common name of Aurelia is the moon jellyfish. In this figure, you can see a well differentiated epidermis, gastrodermis, and mesoglia are shown. The Oral arms are present in these organisms, and above that a mouth is present. Tentacles are present all around their body, and this figure also shows the gonads. The next example is of the Adamsia. Adamsia is a sessile form, and in this sessile form, an oral disc is present, and around the oral disc, all over tentacles are present. The oral disc are surrounded by the tentacles. A mouth is present, which leads to the pharynx, and there is also a pedal disc which helps in the attachment of these organisms to their substratum. The phylum Coelenterata, also known as the phylum Cnidaria, due to the presence of specialized cells called cnidoblasts, which are stinging in nature, they are also known as the phylum Cnidaria. The body cavity in the coelenterates is known as the coelenteron, hence the name Coelenterata. So there are two names on the basis of two characteristic features present in this phylum. These cnidoblast cells are present on the tentacles which are around the mouth of these organisms, and these tentacles help in catching of the prey because they have cnidoblast cells. They exist in two forms throughout the life cycle: the polyp, which is the sessile form, and the medusa, which is a motile form, throughout the life cycle. And these two forms alternate in the life cycle of these organisms, that is known as the metagenesis. So they reproduce both by sexual and asexual means. The polyp, it reproduces by the asexual means and forms the medusa, and the medusa reproduces by the sexual means and forms the polyps. So this was about the metagenesis in Coelenterata. So students, in this part we discussed about all the characters of the phylum Coelenterata, like about the excretory system, their nervous system, circulatory system, and also about their reproduction. In the next part, we'll start with our next phylum, that is the phylum Ctenophora, so stay tuned.